Excellent. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's amazing to, and we're honored that so many of you all are taking the time in order to be with us. It would have been totally awesome if you all could have been here in Houston for this convening, so that you could experience Project Row House's Third Ward and met us and the people who make this fellowship resonate. It is, we're all trying to figure out how to work this whole new virtual convening. And but it's great that you all are here in order to hear and talk to us about the work about the Kathrine G. McGovern College for the Arts, Project Row House's fellowship. We're going to do some short introductions, and then I'll do an overview of our time together today. So in general, I am the director for the Center for Art and Social Engagement at the Kathrine G. McGovern College of the Arts, which is the KGMCA. I develop pilot programs, community partnerships, and research initiatives that center creativity, community for impact conversations for the 21st century city. Prior to U of H, I was a curator, producer, commissioner, performer, and queer community organizer. So that's me, Carrie, or Carol.
So hi everyone, my name is Carol Zoe. I use she or they pronouns. And I am a cultural organizer, currently based in Los Angeles, California. My official title is the Rose Fellow with Little Tokyo Service Center, where I'm an artist in residence. I'm working in the neighborhood of Little Tokyo, and also as the Chief Ray of Sunshine with U.S. Department of Arts and Culture. Carrie? Carrie, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm Carrie Marie Schneider. I'm an artist that works on survival creativity, which means like how does the imagination make a way out of no way? And what forms of support allow silence to break? So I make public experiments, including how we might renegotiate our relationship to water post-Harvey and in the face of climate change in Houston. I use somatics for intergenerational reckoning, and I advocate for the value of creative and care work. I love to write, dance, and work with people and make video.
Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Ryan Dennis. I am Project Row House's curator and art programs director. This is kind of my last moment in a capacity with Project Row Houses as I'm transitioning to the Mississippi Museum of Art in the next few months. My work focuses on African-American contemporary art with an emphasis on socially engaged art practices, site-specific projects, public interventions, and the development of public-facing programs for both adults and youth. I am very much interested in the intersection of art and social justice and really trying to find ways to create equitable opportunities for artists to thrive in their daily life and within their work. On a pretty personal note, I am also a new mother of a 7-month-old, which gives me new life and new ways to imagine the possibilities within my work.
So before we launch into the talkie talk portion, I also want to name some of our other fellows, our prior fellows, which include Regina Agu, Iacum Gulalat, Bilby Bland, Sara Rafael Garcia, Nicoleta de la Brown, and Jose Eduardo Sanchez. Some of y'all might actually be in this room, and we are thrilled to just name you all. We'll talk through the history and general components of the fellowship. We'll also then go into the major learning from the 4 years. We were basically going to discuss the where are we now and then next steps at the end of it. But we are also going to try to go through this pretty quickly so that we actually have some time for questions and interaction with you all. We are talking quickly, and we'll try not to shorthand the conversation, but if there are other things that you all need to know, please use the question and answer section, the box. Type in your questions there. We'll try to either, some of us who weren't talking, we'll either try to answer it, type it quickly, or we'll try to answer it live, but please keep that as the option there. And so, yeah, I think that, but I guess we're going to move into the history of the fellowship and how it all kind of got started. So, Brian?
Great. So I don't want to assume that anyone knows what and where Project Row Houses is. So I'm just going to give a quick shout to the organization. So Project Row Houses is a nearly 27-year-old organization that is located in the heart of 3rd Ward, one of the city's oldest African-American neighborhoods. The organization's mission is to empower people and enrich communities through engagement, art, and direct action. There is a lot to share about Project Row Houses, and if you need to kind of familiarize yourself with the organization, I do suggest you look on our website, which is www.projectrowhouses.org. And I also want to encourage you to maybe purchase our first book, which is called Collective Creative Actions, because it really gives some good context into the ways in which our founding artists, there are 7 of them. One of the most well-known artists is Rick Lowe, who I would hope many people on the call know him and his work. But the book is also edited by me, and it's available, I think, just to give a pretty good context to the organization. So I want to, fast forward quite a bit and discuss the relationship, the development of this fellowship program. So I started at Project Row Houses in 2012. And when I started at Project Row Houses, we had a residency program in kind of partnership with the core program. And the core program is a residency program that is facilitated by the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. I would say for a number of reasons, the program had some unsuccessful moments, and at some point it was decided that we needed to really reevaluate the start and the finish of the residencies that were taking place, and really think about platforming a fellowship or residency that Project Row Houses had more kind of equity and buy-in to. And so we ended that program, and over a course of about 6 to 8 months, the director at the time, Linda Shearer, myself, and Rick Lowe decided to do a brainstorming session. The brainstorming session was to really kind of invite individuals to discuss the structure and profile of residency programs that were out in the world. So in 2014, we hosted this visioning session, and we invited a group of artists, academics, and art professionals to answer a set of questions. Those questions were, what are the best residencies and fellowship programs that they participated in or knew about? What characteristics made them meaningful? What types of situations and structures did they find themselves to be most conducive for learning and developing within their work, and really kind of helping skill sets and skill sharing? What support systems and tools did they feel that were critical to support a successful residency or fellowship program? And what would a kind of ideal residency program look like from their perspective? All of these questions really allowed us to consider structure and aspects of logistics, skill building, and understand what, if folks could go back in time, would they need more of. So that visioning session, I think, was really profound and a kind of grounding for the development of what we have now. Sixto was part of that fellowship, that brainstorming session. Carrie was part of that brainstorming session. And from that, we created 2 programs. One was with the Mitchell Center. So it should be known that Project Row Houses and the University of Houston had participated and kind of, not just participated, but created different programs and projects over a number of years. There just wasn't really kind of official ways of formalizing this relationship. And so in many ways, the brainstorming session and the visioning session allowed us to do that. So we formed this partnership with the Mitchell Center, the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Center, called Performing the Neighborhood. It was a 5-year partnership to commission major performance-based works by contemporary artists to be presented in and around the Project Row Houses site. Artists who were invited drew upon the neighborhood's kind of rich history and the complicated intersection between the University of Houston's campus, which is like a mile down the road, and within the community that surrounds Third Ward. Artists were selected jointly between myself and shout out to my dear collaborator and friend Pia Agrawal, who we developed a series of projects and programs with artists Jason Moran, Kevin Beasley, and Oakley Okulisi. And then also from the brainstorming session, the visioning session, we started working more deeply with Sixto to really develop a fellowship that allowed us to partner with an institution of higher learning, which was also part of our strategic plan. And I think this is a good segue for Sixto to talk about the Center for Arts Leadership.
Thanks, Ryan. Because I think one of the things that we want to stress is that this fellowship wouldn't exist without relationships. It would, and one of the things that in Houston, I think that we can actually say that we have, like, the arts community has a history of a lot of collaboration and a lot of intertwining of organizations. And I think that, formerly, before I was at the University of Houston, I was at Diverse Work, and Diverse Work's relationship with Project Row Houses, spanned from the beginning of Project Row Houses, and a lot of the employees worked like different places, we switched employees and board members. So I think that I've had, my relationship with Row Houses was when I was still at its curator at Diverse Work. But when I transitioned to U of H, it allowed us in order to rethink what that relationship might look like. And this fellowship also actually happened at a time, I came to the University of Houston to create the Center for Arts Leadership, which was an investigation of what did it mean to think about where artists are, what leadership meant, and not just about executive directorship, but really think about how do we think about issues of cultural policy, and how do we create new levels of engagement of it so that artists, community members, and leadership can happen in so many different places. At the same time, a couple of years after my coming to the University of Houston, there became an idea in order to formulate the College of the Arts, that would take these ideas, the School of Art, School of Theater and Dance, School of Music, Laffer Art Museum, the Mitchell Center for the Arts, and the Center for Arts Leadership, and create a new college. This fellowship happened at that same time because we were then I was able to think for the Center for Arts Leadership, what community engaged practice would mean for a university, how we could actually center these ideas of the fellowship, think about Rick and Rick's history, think about our relationship with Project Row Houses, and was there a way in order for us to actually model what social practice or responsible community engaged practice might look like as a university program. I was then able to work with the dean in order to rethink the vision of the Center for Arts Leadership and create the Center for Art and Social Engagement. So part of the things about that, we were leading with some of the questions. And some of the questions for me, as we formulated the Center for Art and Social Engagement, was how can the university support a community organization? In what ways were we actually being a partner, and ways were we thinking about equity in that aspect? What does that support mean for a university, as well as what does it mean for a community? And recognizing that there are a lot of histories between university entities and their neighborhoods, and how can we actually be the best neighbor that we could be and utilize art and community engaged practice as a means in order to make some of that happen. I think that we also wanted to be very clear in order to think about that we were working because this was Project Row House's legacy. We were the new people in the field and they have been doing that work for 20 plus years, and that we were actually there in order to help amplify their work and actually think about this aspect. I think there was a question in terms of why of the College of the Arts. I think that there was a focus at that point and continued that there is an opportunity in Houston to center art and actually think about where arts can be in a leadership within the city. And I think that we are continuing to figure out what that means and how we actually can be good in terms of partnership. So I think that those are some of the questions that I had as we were creating the Center for Art and Social Engagement. And I think that those kind of feed into the curriculum, the guiding principles for the fellowship. So Ryan?
Sorry, it always takes me a minute to unmute myself. So the guiding principles for the fellowship, when we started the fellowship, we wanted to make sure that we allowed for artists to have a period of time to sit and really explore within their work. I think for a while, from my perspective, I recognized that there was a serious kind of proliferation of MFA social practice programs that were really pushing these project-based approaches. And from the conversations that I was having with artists, it seemed like they were, kind of being reactionary in some of the projects that were being made and not really learning about the neighborhood, learning about the people in that neighborhood and where they wanted to kind of respond with them, while obviously thinking about their own practices, but it just felt a little disjointed. And so Sixto and I talked a lot about, standing firm on allowing for time to be of value within the fellowship program. So it's time-based, it's kind of responsive approach that is truly informed by the artist. We wanted to develop a kind of learning process that we could kind of build up with the artist and really allow for something that was organic and responsive. We also wanted, as a guiding principle, to be respectful and responsive and really move with the idea of in action, right? Doing no harm to the communities and the individuals that we were connecting with and are connecting with. Being responsive again. I mean, there are moments, just as an example, when sometimes artists will come into a neighborhood like Third Ward and want to do a project, and that project is like, oh, I want to do something on, rape culture in Third Ward. And it's like, well, that's not something that is a real problem in this neighborhood. I mean, there are things that we can talk about regarding rape culture, but if you're kind of imposing your idea on something regarding a neighborhood that is actually not what's going on, that can create more problems. And I definitely did not want to push any type of agenda that created more and more negative stereotypes about a neighborhood like Third Ward and the ways in which that we're, working with artists. Another kind of principle that we framed from the beginning was offering and really pushing the artists to sit with guiding questions. So they start their residency with 3 to 5 questions. Sixto, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's also part of their application process. And those questions are about what they want to explore, talk through, build up, etc., throughout the year span of time. Those guiding questions really set a tone for exploration and versus kind of arriving at a moment with their own potentially narrow ideas about what could come off as kind of a fixed approach. And then we really wanted to create an opportunity for a local and a non-local artist. The idea behind that is so much of the work of Project Row Houses and even the ways that we've developed this fellowship is through, as Sixto said, relationships, it's through trust, but it's also through expanding a network. And so the idea to have a local artist, someone who really knows potentially knows about Third Ward, but knows Houston or knows the areas in which they often kind of find themselves. With a non-local artist, is just an it's a way to start a foundation for building together. So you will hear from Carrie and Carol, they did not really know each other, but things have kind of built up over the course of a 3-year period. And I think, Carol coming to a city like Houston, being connected with Carrie, I mean, there were just other points of connections with people and places that Carrie was able to offer Carol that was beyond, say, Sixto and my reach.
So I think that, like one of the reasons why Carol and Carrie, they were our pilot mentees. They helped, make sure that when Ryan and I, were developing the ideas about the fellowship, we really needed to invest in people who would actually be able to invest in the process, as well as be able to be clear about how this was to be able to move that. So we identified Carol and Carrie, who have long-term relationships with us, and then in subsequent years, we actually opened it up into an application process. But I think that we're going to start with Carrie in order to kind of talk about her relationship and how the fellowship worked with her.
So I feel like we're already going over time, so I'm going to do the Cliff's Notes, which is that I do not come from an art family. I do not come from a context that has anything to do with art. I come from a little small town outside of Houston that's very racist and conservative and grows rice and plays football. And I managed to make it to art school and fight for the power of art to change social relationships. And then I had Black feminist mentors like Paula Phillips and Fletcher Mackey who told me, pay attention to Project Row Houses when you go home. And when I got home, I realized I could either do an MFA program in a petri dish, or I could actually make work in my hometown with the backing of Project Row Houses. And with Sixto, who from the initial get-go was always supporting my projects. So that really enabled me to start a 10-year. I think this is actually really a weird story in the history of social practice, because with this specific support, I was able to root in my own hometown instead of chasing itinerant project-based accolades. I could really develop my research. So Carol, are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Okay. So that included Houstonians talking about their own spatial geography and their own neighborhoods as experts on ongoing arts education, trying to audit classes instead of going into debt for an MFA. It included artists as workers deserving equitable compensation for our labor with Jenny Ash in charge. It included artists being in solidarity with community members, refusing to be the tools of gentrification in terms of Richard Florida's or creative placemaking ideas. And on a basic level, artist inclusion in the cultural planning process, which is essentially a fight for nothing about us without us, because artists are expected to do so much uncounted labor for the economy. And how do we make sure that our voices are counted in the policy that makes the structures that we work under? And along the way, I was always, yelling and crying into microphones, but I wasn't the only voice, because row houses and wherever Sixto was working at the time, had my back in terms of, we believe in more equitable care and payment for artists. We believe in the role of the artist in society. And it wasn't only the official structures of row houses, it was also that they had generations of artists that were mentored under their wings. So Ayanna Jolivet McLeod and Autumn Knight were people who I looked up to for the entire span of developing as an artist. And in terms of figuring out what I was gonna do, I think, I don't know how many people I'm talking to on this call, but I feel a lot of y'all must have faced this in your city, where if you reach a certain strata of research and output, does your city have room for it? or do you have to move out of it? And for me, the fellowship came at a time where it was offering a structure where I could stay in my city and like really solidify my research and really do interdisciplinary, like rigorous work with it in a way to grow what came forward next. I want to shout out Adrienne Marie Brown and pleasure activism, because the fellowship allowed me to come in with like a really massive interdisciplinary question, which is, where does great creativity come out of? Does it come out of dire circumstances, like in the petrochemical belly of the beast Houston, or does it come out of support? And with this fellowship, I could like open it up to somatics, I could open it up to neurobiology, and I had a chance to refound the basis of my creativity. So I think that's my spiel.
Wait, but Carrie, you have so much more.
Do you want me to talk about the artist talk?
I'm like, I'm your link DJ. I'm like, there are 5 more links that you put on here.
Okay, so if you want to hear more about like this culminating research that the fellowship allowed me to do, Carol's putting a link now. It also, are we on Brain Trust?
We're on Brain Trust.
So the fellowship was really cool because other residencies or like name brand, like artist opportunities, like things that you put on your CV, they may not include the support for the thinkers that help hone your thinking to like really make it good. And this fellowship offers a brain trust, and it also offers flexibility in the brain trust. So for example, I had an anarcho-feminist queer tango activist named Alayo Ramo, and I had a therapist who like uses creative forms of healing, Victoria Jones. And I also had a performance artist with a drama therapy background who's Autumn Knight. And I can't think of any other platform that would have been like, we understand the marrow of your inquiry and we support you to find these differently disciplined people that will provide input. So that was really massive in terms of like, I got to pick what I cared about, and they provided people that I could learn from in a flexible enough container that I don't think it exists elsewhere. So I was able to do like an artist activist matchmaking event. And I was also able to pilot, like what you see in the background is an experiment about whether Houstonians can renegotiate our relationship to water post-Harvey and in the face of climate change, which is Washington.
I'm sorry, Carrie.
Yeah.
Carrie, I'm sorry. So you're speaking about the brain trust, and I think I should probably at least share what a brain trust is.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of our fellowship, we ask each artist to identify 3 to 5 individuals, practitioners, artists, poets, writers, etc., that they would want to kind of explore and research with. The brain trust persons are individuals who have an expertise in the interest of the artist and their guiding questions. And the brain trust, the way that it's kind of structured is, if Sixto and I have relationships sometimes with individuals and we're able to kind of make some introductions. I mean, we always make an introduction, I should say, because we also frame it in the kind of in the fellowship context. But it's kind of the responsibility of the artist to do some follow-up and just make sure that that relationship sustains itself in the way that it can to grow and thrive. So.
I think that we also wanted to, we also do give some honorarium to the Brain Trust in order to understand that part of the thing is that we want to acknowledge that they have experience, connections, and those are resources, and that we actually need to be respectful of that and be able to monetize that. And so that the art in itself, it allows the artist ways in order to leverage their fellowship to give resources to the people that they think are instrumental within communities and their own practice.
So good.
Carol, you want to comment?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the major opportunities at the fellowship and a few of the reasons why this fellowship was such a unique experience for me as an artist. So I came to the fellowship as someone who had been working with Rick on a project up in Dallas. So I was technically the out-of-town fellow, and by out-of-town we mean like 5 hours north up the highway. And so I was actually apprehensive about taking this fellowship because Project Row Houses is so deeply rooted in Houston. It's so deeply rooted in Black arts and culture. And I absolutely, in terms of a year duration of the fellowship, did not feel like swooping in and doing a project, especially when I was also managing another project up in Dallas, Texas. And so I think that Sixto and Ryan were really supportive in working with Carrie and me to really think about what the framing of this project was and what we might pursue within it. And so what really emerged out of the first year was that this would be a learning and research fellowship as opposed to a project-based fellowship. So I think usually we construct projects where an artist comes in and communities are supposed to be enlightened by them and learn from them. And I actually felt myself in the opposite dynamic, which is that I was here to learn from Project Row Houses and to learn from their history and to really work on a research question that I maybe didn't have the space to do in my day-to-day in Dallas. And so my work was focused on looking at the dynamics of artists working on creative placekeeping and on anti-gentrification efforts in 7 different cities across the United States. So to really just have this comparative look, because I had relocated, I was raised in Texas, but I spent a good chunk of time in Los Angeles. And I was always just really struck by how the urban forms, the politics, the history, all of that contributed to gentrification manifesting in really different ways, but also in ways that were manifested regionally, from the migration relationships from LA to Texas, or later when I was living on the East Coast, the relationship between New York City and Philadelphia. And so what this fellowship really enabled me to do is to build a network, both a network across the different cities in which I was researching, but also a network within Houston that really became the learning community that continues to inform my thinking about how I work in place to this day. And so in addition to having monthly meetings with this beautiful group of people, I learned so much from just sitting in on the Emancipation Economic Development Council meetings that were led by Asada Richards, and doing some facilitated community feedback events with her. I learned so much from JP and his work with Antenna and on language justice. And of course, being paired up with a local fellow like Carrie was amazing, because Carrie is the best guide to Houston that you can have in terms of Houston's assets and resources. And another important component of the fellowship was that we had the opportunity to be mentors for Summer Studios. So Summer Studios is a program every year where Project Row Houses brings together I think 6 or 7 students from the universities all across Houston. Oh, yeah, for sure. If you want to.
Yeah, so now 11 years ago, we started Summer Studios. And Summer Studios gives artists from local colleges and universities an opportunity to utilize the art houses, which is where all the installations happen at Project Row Houses. They utilize the art houses for a 6-week period, and then they have a 5-week exhibition. So just in terms of a little history of the program, about 4 years ago, I shifted the program so that there was a mentorship component to the program, because I just noticed that a lot of the younger artists were just kind of floating a bit. And I think they needed some more support, a little more kind of guidance, and also maybe expanded ideas on what was happening outside of their like university or college bubbles. So with the fellows, you know, Carrie and Carol, Carrie and Carol mentored them over this 10-week period. Throughout that 6-week period, there is a kind of curriculum that is developed, and the fellows and the students meet every week to go over a myriad of things, which Carrie and Carol, I mean, I think y'all are going to share parts of the curriculum, but just to kind of frame or give some context to, that would be good.
Yes, so Summer Studios, it was Carrie and my first collaboration, so it was an amazing opportunity to get to know each other. And it was also an opportunity to work with some amazing talented artists like Kobe Deal, and be part of their development and community-based artists. And lastly, it was our opportunity to create a curriculum based around Project Row Houses and Project Row Houses methodology. And so, for example, we read The Poetics of Space because our Summer Studios residents were installing in these like very specific architectures. Carrie had this amazing guide to Houston arts assets and resources, and we talked about professional development because that was an area of support that our residents really articulated needing.
Yeah, I think the only thing to add there is that like it was so special to be paired with Carol, because in all of my professional life, I've had social practice curriculum handed down from on high. And in this case, we were asked, like, what do we want to pass on to the next generation? So it was a really beautiful experiment in, like, discernment and deciding what is generous, like, for their next work that always had to be rooted in what the work they would do at Summer Studios in the context of row houses would be like.
And I think it is really important just to note the curriculum that you all built was important for the students because, you know, many of the students are coming from straight studio programs at the universities. And, you know, it's no knock to the universities and the professors, but I think that there's such a kind of narrow curriculum at times that being able to at least kind of ground or introduce some of social practice elements and components or socially engaged art is of kind of great value for an artist that's that young, you know, working and developing.
So I'm also just going to jump in because right now we're trying to leave a lot of time for questions, and we're going to get to some of them, but in a bit. But I think that Carrie, like one of the things we wanted to transition is kind of some major learning and kind of like that we've experienced through this. And I think that Carrie and Carol, if you can actually reflect from a fellow's point of view, like what does the fellowship actually enable you to do that wasn't possible? Or what opportunities did it open up, and what shifts what shifts was it able to make happen?
Okay, so basically I had my whole life's work, which is like, how does the imagination make a way out of no way? And then a 10-year practice of aggregating survival creativity examples. And then this fellowship came along that was like, we care about that as valid research. We care about this as a question that should be supported to be answered by people in fields beyond art. And so it helped me not only to like create this artist activist matchmaking event, not only to like launch this project about water, but also to like create a deeper foundation of my own work. Like I could have continued making work as an artist along narrower channels of like what artists are supposed to produce, but instead I was supported to really research. And not only that, I was like supported in my own hometown because there's such a myth about you have to leave to like be supported. And I was lucky enough to get a foundation around people who had been like doing the work for a long time with me. And I feel like it's made me insistent on what forms of support should be there for me to like really do my real work, if that's helpful.
Yeah, and I want to lift up some concrete ways in which I feel like the foundation that the fellowship laid, so that research foundation, that network building foundation has manifested in the 3 years since. So I was in Philly briefly as a program director at Asian Arts Initiative, and there I actually ended up convening the Connecting Chinatowns network based on relationships that I had made with artists working against gentrification in different Chinatowns during my research period. And that network continues to be active and to participate in like bi-coastal and multi-regional action. I'm also currently working in Little Tokyo on issues of arts, community plan advocacy, resident engagement. And so that is also directly related to the research basis that was generated from this fellowship. And then a couple of other projects I would lift up would be my work in artist organizing at U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, Intercultural Leadership Institute, as well as being on the board of Imagining America, which was actually a relationship that Sixto helped me with to really think about, well, how are higher ed universities accountable to the communities that they work in, and how do we support faculty and students who are interested in doing this type of deep community engaged work. And I also want to lift up a collaboration that has been brewing for 3 years between me and Carrie, which is when we met, we both realized that we were really into Korean spas. And we were really into thinking about how trauma was impacting our communities and artists and other frontline responders that we knew were doing this work, as well as how we might think about somatic approaches to healings, and awesome baths being one of those somatic approaches. And so Carrie and I are working together on this project called Spa Embassy, which pre-COVID-19 was premised as spa days for activists, but really on a more serious note, thinking about how we facilitate access to healing and healing justice in our communities. And now we're really working on, well, what are our demands regarding care work, touch, and healing post-COVID-19?
So now it's my turn. So I think part of the thing that, like, you know, from the university and kind of like the organizational point of view, one of the things that we want to think about is, like, in terms of success measures, is definitely like how have we actually invested in the artists, and what have they gotten out of it? Not only within the year, but in what ways are those exactly that these questions actually can feed into a much longer career path, and in what ways are we actually helping enable their leadership in terms of socially engaged work into the field, but also enable them in terms of thinking about where they, like, how do we enable them in order to feel empowered to change, like, the entire landscape. I think that also, you know, it is important also for us to think about how this has translated and how this continues to be an important incubator for thinking for the university, and how the learning that we are doing with with row houses and in the community continues to feed back as to how we actually need to be thinking about our programs. What is a relationship that we need to be having with the community, with the neighborhood, and how that also is also reflective of how we relate to our students, so that the communities and the students are simultaneously, that we're thinking about them and we're trying to hold all of them together in this aspect. I think that one of the things that we've been able to do is actually think about what we're doing here as pilots and in the fellowship, and actually expand those ideas within the university. And so that we've been able to get grant funding for the summer studios and the fellows engagement with that. We've been able to actually help get grant funding from the university in order to take the fellowship from a like mid-career artist aspect into an undergraduate fellowship, and really think about how do we continue to build these ideas of practice, how do we think about experience for undergraduates so that their experience with community engaged work is not just about a postgraduate engagement. And how do we think about, and then also our next steps about this is that we are also trying to connect to other programs within the university that are talking about community engaged practice, which has been, or community engaged work. And luckily the University of Houston has invested into this idea of co-curricular activities and really helping to support what does it mean for our students to have experiences outside of our classrooms and engage into our neighborhoods. And this fellowship and the work that we're doing here and our partnership with Project Row Houses is a flagship component of the Third Ward Initiative, which is one of the components from President Couture of University of Houston, and to think about how the university can be specific partners with our neighborhood and Third Ward in education, in business, in the arts, and in health. So, and then also in terms of pedagogy, thinking about like not only for undergraduates, but like one of the great things is that Sara Rafael Garcia, who was our fellow last year, was able to think about her fellowship last year and actually create an entire curriculum and pedagogy around it. And so she is now teaching at Chapman University a course called Ethnofiction Through Contemporary Narratives that build on the processes here, and that she collects and looks at how ethnofiction impacts storytelling, and it's how this form of creative archiving preserves ethnic and gender narratives and represents histories and reimagined futures. So like definitely trying to work on like multiple levels in terms of pedagogy and as well as community impacts. Brian, what did I miss?
I think you covered it. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the successes, it's the continuation of relationship building and really finding ways to support and connect with the networks that are already established in the neighborhood, and not trying to create necessarily a new thing, but really leaning on the resources that are there that are often we're told that are not, right? So it's a kind of question of, maybe it's like value placement, right? And the distribution of value and support, and the ways that we connect the fellows with people and places and organizations. And I say that, you know, as it relates to say something like the EEDC or the Third Ward Community Cloth, to very substantial organizations. One is newer than the other, but still kind of function and I think have similar kind of goals. And I think another kind of success from Project Row House's standpoint is just understanding that there is a need for a fellowship program that is time-based and will allow for us to kind of explore the creation and development of a PRH Institute at some point in the future. And that PRH Institute is fairly, I think, nomadic at this point, and that there are ways in which the PRH Institute functions, but really, I think the fellowship and other exchange programs and residencies that we have had in the past give a kind of grounding and weight towards the new initiatives of the organization.
So that's a lot that we've been like throwing out, and there's actually so much more that that we've been thinking about and thinking what we're doing. But I think that this is kind of our pivot point in order to to look at some of the questions in the chat and actually address some of them specifically, and and work on that. I'm going to go ahead and deal with in terms of funding. We were able to. There is research money from the University of Houston that supported this, but we actually had an incredible visionary lead donor, Suzanne Dale Booth, who has been aware of Rick Lowe's work, and we're aware of Project Row Houses. And we built on that relationship in order to actually ask her to invest in this launch and actually think about and work with us to think about what this potentially could be, because we thought it was radical and important, but we had no proof. And I think that we are really grateful for her and that lead funding that allowed us in order to actually had about 4.5, 5 years in order to do this research and actually demonstrate, like with you all, that there is actually some significant work that we are doing here.
So at this time, I think I'm going to ask some of the questions. That's our goal? Okay.
So as you read that, and I'm also just shout out Mirabai, thank you so much for your work and the closed captioning. You are amazing at being able to type as fast as we're talking and actually make sense of this. This is it's reassuring. Thank you very much for that work.
Okay, so there's a question from Brigitte, specifically to Sixto. Thank you for speaking on support and equity and institutional and independent partnerships. Based on your experience and expertise generally, what are institutions looking for in community partnerships? What would you like to see from an organization approaching your institution for partnership?
It's a lot. I think that we are a major research university with a student population of over 45,000. So there are so many pockets of research and so many pockets of engagement. I do think that what I can speak to is the work that we're doing here in the arts and acknowledging the fact that this was an intentional effort in order to be working with our community partners and thinking and solidifying our relationships and actually trying to find ways that we can actually work with them and in what ways that we actually are a partner and not the typical kind of gorilla in the room and taking over the work. It is not an easy approach. This is not a typical approach. I think that that's one of the things where I think that in terms of what types of things that we're looking for, it is actually about trying to find what those needs are and actually aligning the needs at the timing that we're doing it. And I think that there are many of what we were talking about that was about the fortuitous way of thinking about Houston and its diversity, thinking about placemaking and the role of art in building a city. And we were able to actually think that and help leverage those ideas into supporting the fellowship and supporting kind of this investigation from a university standpoint. So I know that that's not a complete answer, Brigitte, but I think that that's one of the things that for us, I can speak for me, that we were trying to figure out how we actually were able to partner and parallel so that we're jointly actually invested into the goals of the project.
There are really good questions on this thread, just saying.
So Carrie, you want to take one?
Did you want to take one?
Okay, well, I feel like thank you to those of you with neurological differences that said my background was distracting and frustrating. Thank you. I have changed it now. Okay, Lauren says, our relationship to our bodies and through our bodies to each other is changing. Carol, how do you imagine how intimate space and public space will reintegrate after quarantine?
And I would offer that this is a question that maybe you can co-answer with me, Carrie. So first of all, I think we're like in an emergent space right now in terms of how we're responding to the current crisis. By that, I'm saying that I actually have no predictability in terms of like what my life or the world will be like in 2 months. And so I'm offering this prediction, I think, while like acknowledging that things are still emergent. But I actually watched a lecture on the polyvagal ladder at 4 a.m. 2 nights ago, which is also something that Carrie and I talk about. And it talked about our trauma cycles in terms of like being incredibly activated, and then I think like processing that shock through like a dip in energy, and then finally through normalizing and repair. And honestly, I see that happening in our social body right now in terms of everyone being like really activated, really ready to go, like really ready to help, really ready to be first responders. And I think that's so wonderful. And also in my experience working in communities with a lot of high trauma, I find it necessary to make space for like what that traumatic aftershock might be, like what happens when we're no longer ready to go, because I know that like that's definitely a cycle that I have had to walk through. And so one of my curiosities right now is like, how do we integrate this understanding and like ritual of healing in the public sphere and in the public consciousness, and actually make it okay for us to stop and take stock of what is happening to us.
Someone is asking what the theory is called, and it's the Polyvagal Theory. So this is what all of our nervous systems do in response to trauma. I think I would only add that the thing that the fellowship gave me was to be able to pivot from like, how does a creative impetus come out of like being the only thing available, to how do you work creatively out of pleasure and out of sustainable foundation? Because in Houston, we're like a petrochemical belly of the beast, so we have a lot of experience working from the guts of emergency. And I think one thing that's cool about the fellowship is that actually, in terms of preparing or retooling for the coronavirus, it would not have a lot to do, because it's already thought about how to take care of people. It's already thought about deep, sustainable care, which makes me really so proud to have been a part of it, because it's ongoing in the future. It's a good format.
I think this is a good question. It's for Carrie and Carol. What surprised you about co-creating at a different scale outside of your former studio, residency, and academic environment?
Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
No, you can start.
I think what surprised me is like how much people outside of art saw the work that we do as valuable. So after the election, I was in a cohort of 20 activists, all working on different causes. And through the fellowship, I was able to like link them with a bunch of artists brainstorming around each of their struggles. And also the fellowship let me like ask a question about creativity to neurobiologists, to somatic practitioners, to dance and movement therapists. Like, it let me take my core internal question and find where it's relevant beyond the boundaries of like the art walls. And each of those channels has continued to be like generative and important, because in a lot of cases on their own, in their own academic disciplines, they don't have access to artists. So this sort of platformed me as an artist in a way where I could talk to other disciplines, which is rare.
So I think actually being in a research mode put me in a more isolated way of working than before. And I say this because I come out of probably like 6, 7, 8 years of working on collective art projects. So I think always working in dialogue with someone, always working with someone else in the room. And for me, the focus on research really forced me to ask, like, what do I want to pursue? What are my core values? What is my core orientation towards the world? And there are a lot of questions on here about parachuting into community and how you formulate your relationship to community that you're not related to, which I think we can and should go into more detail about. But I would say that having that self-knowledge of like my positionality and what I can contribute, I actually think that's an important part of understanding like how to work with a community that either shares a lot of your background or shares none of your background.
I think that I just want to actually, that is one of the key components of why we're doing the local, non-local. I think part of the things that we continue to want to learn, and we want to continue to explore what that means. How are we as organizations, as row houses, as U of H, really grounding that practice? What does that grounding actually mean? I think that, and also in what ways does an external perspective actually, is that what is important to be the catalyst for our different conversations, and in what ways is that non-local opportunity in a gateway in order to open up different conversations and different ways of looking. So I think that I don't think that we will ever answer that question, because I think that we will continue to, like, with each one of the fellowships and each one of the way that they're looking, we kind of try to tackle it in different ways and different experiences. And part of it is just, we are looking at how are we documenting like our learning over the course of the year, as well as over the course of like, the 4 to 5 years already, and then kind of put everything together.
There's a question from Nicole Urish. I think that's from, hi, you used to be in the core program. Hello. So she says, thank you so much for your presentation. This fellowship looks like a fantastic model. Thank you. I would like to hear some more tips, suggestions for how to negotiate partnerships between large and small organizations. How did you navigate differences of scale and bureaucracy? Yeah, man, I think this is a great question, and Sixto, we can co-answer. From my perspective, from my point of view, it feels sometimes like I'm working with a small organization because it's the Center for Art and Social Engagement, and it's Sixto, and sometimes a really great intern or student worker. And Sixto is really the kind of liaison of other things that happen within the university and the College of the Arts. I think we have tried, what feels like the most bureaucratic thing that we have to deal with, Sixto, correct me if you think I'm wrong, is like the distribution of funds to our fellows. And that can get really kind of unwildly sometimes. So we have tried to go around, some of the various, I don't even know what to call them. They're just kind of, we've tried to get around the bureaucracy of dealing with the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 financial kind of pieces at the university, and find ways to get those funds distributed to Project Row Houses, because we can distribute funds to artists within, a 5 to 10 day period. So, Sixto, would you?
So I think that one of the other things is that the way I think that this works is because it's pretty clear why we are working together, or we continue to reinforce why the partnership exists and what the mutual learning is. And so that I think when we talk about most of the interactions between small organizations and large institutions, I'm not sure that there's always a shared purpose. I'm not sure that there is also always a shared value system. And I think that with this fellowship, it is very clear about how we are positioning it, and in what ways that those elements are significant to the values and the mission of row houses and the value and missions of University of Houston. And I think that we continue to try to go back to what that purpose and that value is, and how are we aligning the work within that. And if it doesn't actually fit within these parameters, or if there's always those tensions, we continue to try to figure out what those tensions are, why they exist, and in what ways are we working in small ways, and what ways are we working in big kind of substantive aspects. And much of what we're doing is in kind of small ways that has actually been able to then prove that this is why it's happening, and actually, demonstrate that this is something that we can build upon. So, it is very much about the relationship that we have and why the values and have brought us together.
And I think that we have really tried to remain kind of nimble and flexible with the development of a fellowship program, especially with the kind of smaller organization compared to, an institution like a university. But yeah, I think we are in year 4 of our program. And I think the same way we've kind of set a value for the artists to have time to develop their research, we also gave ourselves time to make changes and shift when we need to, or recognize that something is not working, or we're actually something about a kind of value has shifted based off of maybe the direction of the university at large. But that's just an example, but that has not happened. I'm just citing an example. But those changes in the flexibility is definitely important. Next question.
I feel there's so many questions about accountability to the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love maybe to have us all give our perspectives, because I feel like the institutional perspective about community accountability is slightly different from what Carrie and I might experience as artists.
Great.
You want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I guess I'll take it from the perspective of how do you work with a community without parachuting in. And, compared to Carrie, who is so rooted in Houston, I actually am fairly itinerant. And for example, my work with U.S. Department of Arts and Culture is a national network that is not geographically rooted in a local community. And so I think about that question a lot. And I think it really has to do with what you understand it to be expertise and agency, and how you define that in your relationships. And so let's see. Yeah, I claim to be an expert on spas, but otherwise, I try not to claim to be an expert on things when it comes to what is impacting local communities and what is impacting local knowledges. I always see myself as playing a supporter role, a doula role, a facilitator role. And for me, projects really emerge out of long-term engagement and dialogue. So for example, my fellowship in Little Tokyo is for 2 years, and I'm 6 months into it. And I have spent those 6 months building relationships and talking to people, and not coming in with a preconceived idea of a project. And so, from my perspective, there is value for artists to be working in communities, but there also needs to be a self-awareness of what we bring, but also what we lack, and who we should be supporting.
And I feel like all I have to say is Kenny Bailey with DS for SI, the design studio for social intervention, was we brought him to Houston and he was do not go where you're not invited. Just don't go.
Yeah.
Just do not go where you're not invited. And if you are invited, make sure you're invited by long-standing community partners, where the artists that are already in the area will get their due and people will be treated equitably instead of extracted from. Pretty simple.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I also think it's important to recognize what your intention is, right? Starting with some intention, a little bit of self awareness about what it is that you are interested in doing in said community, and how you're hoping, like, what are you starting with? I mean, I just think it's important to kind of ask some serious questions. Are you starting with a project that you just kind of like want to live in this space, and you want it to live in this space because aesthetically it looks good? Like, what? It's important to start with a series of questions and just kind of like reduce from there. But I also believe that if you're working, if you're invited by an organization, it's important to kind of recognize like what type of relationships that they have with the neighborhood and the residents and the communities that they exist in. And really, I think it's a kind of it's a exchange. It's reciprocal, and finding ways to continue to amplify the like reciprocity of the relationship versus exploiting the relationship. And it's not, I mean, also these are like, I think that there are really good practices that artists can sit with and really practice. And I think that it just takes time. Like, I can't really stress that enough, that it really takes time to build relationships with people and places and residents. I mean, a place like Project Row Houses wouldn't exist for 27 years if our relationships with like residents and kind of the stakeholders and et cetera did not exist. So when artists do come to Project Row Houses outside of the fellowship program, you know, when I'm introducing them to someone in the neighborhood, that someone in the neighborhood feels like, oh, okay, I can actually like open myself up to a conversation, or, you know, like ask some questions, because Ryan is doing that, and I trust her and the relationship that she has at row houses. So
I am not.
Right on time, Sixto.
Yeah, we're doing well. I think that in terms of this, it's just like, you know, a university's responsibility to a community is significant, like, and difficult, you know, ongoing act. And I think that any large generalizations that I can say about that is it's hard to yeah, but, you know, I can speak very specifically about the work that we're doing and why we're actually trying, like, and this is one of the things where why this fellowship is so important to me, and how that we are able to actually continue to, and part of the biggest task for my job is to think about how to translate the learning, and how to translate what the significance is in the communities and in what this fellowship is doing to more people in the university, and how that it can be a learning opportunity for our students, how it's a learning opportunity for our faculty, and how it isn't how we can continue to utilize this type of methodology and this type of investment into our communities, into our artists, and into our neighbors. And I think that that's just one way that we can actually figure out in this. Yeah, so complex. Sorry, it's not that earth-shattering, but it's still really complex.
I feel like for my part, what I want to add is like, I've never known a creative practice outside of responding to emergency. So while we are all in this current emergency, which is COVID, and the one before it, which is Harvey and climate change, and the one before that, which is like rapid gentrification and instrumentalization of artists and displacing of longtime residents, this fellowship and the people behind it and the thinking behind it of like art's long-term role in society has kept my work going and will keep it going. And I think it's something that we're all paying attention to now. Like, how do artists respond to emergency? They respond when they are well equipped. They respond when they are supported. They respond when they have resources, because you can't whip it out of nowhere. Like, you need a foundation. And I've just been lucky to like have participated in one example of how to create a foundation for that, so that your work can thrive.
So I think that we actually want to pivot to thinking about what the next steps are for the fellowship and kind of, and in this aspect. I know that there are a lot of other questions that are out there, and we'd like to be able to address some of them in the future, and maybe actually some of them can be addressed offline. But want to think about the current fellowship, which started in January, and we had Nicoletta and Jose do their artist talk in January, and then essentially we have COVID. And I think that part of what we are doing is thinking about what is an extension of the time frame for this fellowship look like? What does it mean? How do we actually work within the fellows' schedules, as well as be responsive to what the community needs, and understand how can we continue to operate, whether there is actually some ways of, when there's actually a little bit more clarity. I don't think that there's ever going to be more, I'm not sure about stability, but clarity I think is something that we're looking to be able to move forward. So typically, we would be launching the next round in October. We are going to most likely host a focus groups and community aspects in order to kind of see what does the social practice in this time look like, and actually figure out what our learning is in order to be able to move forward. We will launch and announce to everybody by the beginning of December what the next stage of the fellowships are in terms of open applications, and what that means. We do plan on having another round and we were going to be in 2021. And when that starts is actually going to be dependent upon where the community is, where Houston is, and what travel looks like. But beyond that, I think that some of the things that we want to talk about is kind of what do we need for the fellowship, and what does that look like? We need the visionary investors like Suzanne Deal-Booth and people in the university who was able to think about this as research. People who have think about organizations and foundations who actually invest in people who have a history of high impact work, whose program is tied to not specific projects, but investments in process and experimentation, and ideas that actually center artists, communities, and commitment toward equitable practice and value. We need more of that, and we hope that that will be something that we can continue to get specifically for this fellowship and to be able to continue it, but also to make that more available to the entire field. I also think that one of the other things that we're working on is community response metrics. I know Mimi Lee, Dr. Mimi Lee from the College of the Education at University of Houston, who's been a partner with me in this, is actually how do we actually think about impact measures and research that is not about tied to fiscal years? How are we actually thinking about evaluation that is about long-term investments in communities and careers? And how do we look at the intentions of artists and their research and the reaction to impact of communities and the collective emergent practices that result from this? We also are interested in how these evaluations need to incorporate community participation and multi-domain metrics. And so that we are actually thinking about what does it mean in terms of the reflection of aesthetics? What does it mean in terms of community and wellness, as well like economics? Or what do those domains need to happen? And so that we are looking at these projects in a holistic and actually fully impactful way. So those are some of the needs, and thank you Creative Capital for encouraging us to put our needs out there. So if any of you all have lots of thousands of dollars that you would like to invest in us and invest in these artists and these fellowships, please reach out to Brian or myself, or me, because Brian is going to Mississippi. So please reach out to me directly, and then we can continue to talk about that. Funding. But it's also we also thank you for these questions. Thank you for these probes in order to make sure hold us
these
accountable.
Questions are really good. We have really good questions.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, that's all.
And thank you for the thinking, because I think this is what we need. We continue to need. This has been we launched this program. We launched this initiative, and I think that we're onto something really spectacular. And I think that the learning that we are happening that's happening is really significant for all of the partners, for the city, and actually for a broader audience. And I think that the ideas that you all are, like the questions that you're bringing up, are things that we need to continue to sit with and continue to be able to find ways in order to answer, and make sure that we are held accountable to all of this as well. Any last thoughts and comments from you all as we are close to time for this?
Today I woke up and saw that there were like 600 attendees on this call. And I was like, that's different from my normal quarantine life. So I just want to ping that we're all here in this moment that is very weird. And it's sweet that we're all tuning in and trying to do our best, because we can't act like it's normal times, because it's not. So thank you all for being here. I really, really love these questions. These are such good questions. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you to our panel.
Wait, Ryan.
No. And thank you to everyone who logged in and spent 90 minutes with us. I'm really hoping that we can continue to share and build together. I mean, we're all working in so many different ways, but in the same ecosystem. So let's make it as best as we can.
Yeah, we look forward to the time to travel, and that hopefully that you all will be able to be here, and that we can actually experience this and have these conversations over a meal, on at row houses or on the porch, or at a time that it would be really significant here. So, Ryan, is there another moment?
Try your shoes.
My
Ryan's
birthday
wearing really
was
good
recently, and I'm wearing some really great shoes. It's my birthday present. Carrie was insistent that I show them.
Her husband brought her these great shoes. It's beautiful.
So if you, we've shared in the chat a number of websites and our bios. All of those websites have connections to to our current email addresses. Please reach out to us individually or collectively about some of that, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you all, throughout the common field convening, but also hopefully over the course of time. Okay, are we all good? Thank you all, and thank you, Mirabai. Thank you, Common Field, Julia, and Maud, for all of your help and assistance bringing us together.
Thank you.
Thank you.